It's been nice to, after finishing what hasn't been my best PGA Tour season, even though it was still pretty good, to go to Wentworth, have the Sunday, and then follow it up by playing good in Spain and having a very, very meaningful win. Said it before, I understand it's not the strongest field, but it's something that means a lot to me, and sometimes controlling myself and the crowd can be a little bit harder. So for me, it was a week to be proud of. So hopefully I can keep that good play going and translate those wins to the PGA Tour, which I've done in the past. I've played great in the Fall and European Tour in the past, and I've translated it to the PGA Tour. So I'm excited to be here. Have not played the golf course yet. I saw some of that event they had here last year, and all the feedback I've gotten from the golf course is that it's fantastic and it's in absolute perfect shape. So I can't wait to get out there.
And that Spanish Open win came at the end of a trending period for Jon Rahm. Here are his last 5 worldwide starts going back to the FedEx St. Jude Championship, including that very near miss, the 62 Sunday at Wentworth in the BMW PGA Championship, where he tied for second with Rory McIlroy behind Shane Lowry. And it's time now for a little Jon Rahm edition of Buy or Sell. We're pleased to be joined by Paige McKenzie. Paige, here's the first question. Buy or sell? Jon Rahm, coming off that Torrey Pines US Open victory 2021, does he win major number 2 in 2023?
Buy. I am buying this all day long. I'm very bullish on Jon Rahm for this upcoming year. Part of the reason why I am on major championships is his style of play. When you look at, he is the best driver on the PGA Tour, at least he was last season, and only 2 players were better than him in greens and regulation percentage. When you talk about major championships, what do you talk about? You need to hit fairways and greens. You need to be a ball striker. And that very much suits Jon Rahm's game, especially right now. And also, I would also maybe a little tip of the cap to the odds makers and what they're projecting for next year. If you are interested at all, it's plus 300 on PointsBet. He's the 2nd favorite for winning any or one of those majors next year. So I'm not the only one that thinks Jon Rahm has a good shot next year.
And Paige sees him quite a bit out in Arizona, Silverleaf, all over the place, hitting golf shots, working on his game. Are you as bullish as Paige?
I am on Jon Rahm. I think he had a lot of distractions this year. There's a lot going on in terms of adding a second young child to the family as well. And T12 being his highest finish in a major was in stark contrast to last year when he didn't finish any worse than 8th in the majors. And when you look at his statistical performance, the only part of Jon Rahm's game that seems to have shown a noticeable drop-off is strokes gained around the green, scrambling. I mean, if you look at his sand saves, even as an example, he gets up and down 40% of the time. Compare that with the tour leader, Shane Lowry, at 67%. At that level, that's an enormous gap. But to me, it suggests more sloppiness than any kind of fundamental issue. And I just don't see a lot of weak spots in Jon Rahm's game. He seems like the kind of guy who's in a good place in his life. He's clearly in a good place with his game based on the results that we just saw there. And he does have an impressive record in major championships. He puts himself in the mix quite a lot. I still think that the temperament is always a bit of a question mark with Jon, but I don't see any compelling reason to argue against Jon Rahm being one of those 4 guys who's going to hoist a trophy next year.
I agree with you. I'm buying this. I think Jon Rahm in 2022, probably an anomaly season for him. I sensed the kind of the consternation about the future of the PGA Tour and kind of wondering where he fit in terms of the strength of his voice compared to Tiger or Rory. I think that was part of the story of this summer for him. Also, the growing family, second child, can maybe just slightly take your eye off the ball just a little bit. And also, you mentioned the short game. Last 3 years, from 24th to 42nd to 143rd in strokes gained around the green. It's a noticeable drop-off, but to me, he is someone built for major championships, 4 top 10s in the Masters, a couple in the PGA, a couple in the US Open, including a victory on a West Coast venue. We're going to the West Coast in 2023. A couple hours north of Torrey Pines. Will be in Los Angeles. Also has a top 10 in the Open Championship as well. I think he has got a fantastic game. I think he is strong mentally, physically. I agree he can run hot, but I think it's passion. And I think it can be a help and a benefit for him sometimes because no one is going to be tougher on himself or a bigger critic than Jon Rahm.
Yeah, he doesn't seem to throw himself off very much. I have heard other players occasionally mutter that it was slightly unsettling when Jon was in full tilt at one point, but that doesn't happen very often. He plays with a much more even keel in a way than Seve does, because back in the day, Seve could throw himself off with the kind of aggravation. And we've seen even guys like Bubba Watson, who are somewhat highly strung on a golf course, throw themselves off. Jon Rahm, it performs at a level that is not thrown off easily, even by his own kind of angst that's going on the golf course. To me, he just seems like he's built for those kind of moments. He's in the prime of his career right now, 27. I do think this year is something of an anomaly when it comes to results. I don't expect it next year.
Well, how about next year? You know, winning a major will be one thing, Paige, but how about getting back to world #1 for Jon Rahm? Are you buying or selling?
I'm buying this. I predicted it about a month ago, so I'm sticking with Jon Rahm as my horse for next year. And a lot has to do with kind of how I framed what he did last season. We take a look at where he fell historically in his career on that driving stat, where I mentioned last season he was #1 in the PGA Tour. It was the best driving year that he's ever had. And a lot of it had to do with the distance gains that he made. He gained over an 11-yard gain off of the tee when you take into consideration the average over the previous 5 years. So a massive improvement in his distance. So that may explain why the short game wasn't exactly what he was looking for. And then when you look at his putting, 2020 is highlighted as his best putting year. His second best was last year. So you combine the very best driving year with the second best putting year. And yes, you mentioned it, that the short game wasn't what he was looking for. And that's been a glaring and obvious negative for him. He was negative strokes gained around the green, as you mentioned, Damon and Eamon. But when you look at where he has played historically, it's been positive. He has a good short game, but perhaps maybe he was focused on a little more distance and let the short game slide a little bit. But I don't think that's going to be a problem for him moving forward, given the fact that there is no pattern of weakness in his short game. It was an outlier last season. So when you take all of that into consideration, yes, I think that Jon Rahm will finish the year as the #1 player in the world because of the strength of his ball striking, his putting, and I think the short game's going to pick up next year.
That's a persuasive case, Damon. Are you persuaded by Paige's argument?
Not quite. And I know that Paige has done her homework, but I think that we're not taking into account the strength of Scotty Scheffler. And that's the only reason why I'm going to go against this. Because, yes, Cameron Smith is going to continue to tumble down the official world golf ranking, you would think. But I think that Scotty Scheffler, coming off of a 4-win season, deserves the respect. You want to talk about a short game that won't quit. You want to talk about someone who's already got that first major championship, who's won on very different golf courses. I think Scotty Scheffler, he may, have a couple of months or a couple of weeks as he did this year where the game isn't as tight as he wants it to be. But I think at the end of 2023, with the points he's accumulated, with the quality of golf that he has, with the way John Fields at Texas describes him of having the it factor before he ever even won on the PGA Tour, we saw it in full and living color in 2022. I think Scotty Scheffler, he may lose the ranking for a week or a month, but by the end of 2023, I think he'll be the man holding the #1 ranking in the world.
I get to be the casting vote.
You are. We're 1-1 here.
In a way. And I don't think Jon Rahm's getting the #1 ranking back next year, but I think it's got more to do with the math of how the world rankings work. 9 players this year in the official world golf ranking earned more points in 2022 than Jon Rahm. Most of his points came from that standout 2021 year. And as they cycle through this 2-year car wash of how the points diminish in value over time. So Jon Rahm's got a little bit more riding in terms of what he might lose in 2023 as well. And he didn't, frankly, win an awful lot of points for the Spanish Open win, because now the way the rankings have changed, you are judged upon who you compete against. That determines the value of the world ranking points you get for a victory. And as we just heard from Jon Rahm, it wasn't the strongest field that he faced at the Open de España. And his tendency and desire to support the European Tour events in Spain is a very noble cause, but it's probably not going to do him a lot of good in the world ranking.
Nor did his win in Mexico either.
No, that was a different world ranking scenario until this one kicked in. But the flip side of that is, as we've just seen from this schedule, they're all going to be competing against the best players in the world consistently week in and week out next year. So there's going to be a lot at stake in those rankings. So a good couple of weeks in those events could make an enormous lot of headway for Jon Rahm. I just think the math is going to make it a little bit of an uphill struggle for him.
What do you think, Paige, about the math?
I mean, leave it to Eamon to break out the calculator and the world ranking breakdown. I appreciate it, and now it makes me call into question maybe how convicted I am that he will rise. And maybe instead, the three of us are at the very end of the year going to have a conversation about whether #1 world ranking is actually the best player in the world if the math doesn't pan out.